Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of On Air with Owen. Excited about this one today. I am joined by Sam Carrington, who is the founder and, I've got to get this right, Chief Smirkistrator of Smirk Experience. Somebody I've had the pleasure of using his services of late, and somebody who I thought I just had to get onto this conversation. So, firstly, Sam, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to be here, and great intro. How many of these have you done now?
Well, 20 something, I think, something like that. So we're getting there. It changes over time, I have to admit. I think the level of enthusiasm goes depending on the guest as well.
Well, I shall take your enthusiasm as a compliment, Owen.
Absolutely. Without a doubt, one of the top two most creative titles. I will just add that it may be the most creative, but I met with somebody recently who was a social media evangelist, and I thought, wow, that's an interesting title. Tom Boston from Salesloft, look him up. So definitely in the top two. Let's put it that way. I'll let the audience be a judge of whether it's top one or top two. But look, let's dive into it. Today we are talking about something that I think for me and for this topic is a little bit off the beaten path, which is why I'm so looking forward to today, because we're talking about the transferable skills between sales and business and comedy, and we'll tie that together with a bit of context in a minute. But you can tell us a bit about Smirk Experience and that kind of stuff, and how those two go together for you and potentially for other people. Interesting topic. We'll dive into it in a minute. Before we do that, can you give me the classic 2 minutes? Who is Sam? Who's Smirk Experience? Tell us a bit about yourselves.
Pleasure. 8 years ago, I had my first go at stand-up comedy at a club in Soho to 35 people. And I've since done over 10 times that number, but for a first dig, 35 is plenty, I can assure you. The first 20 go in a blur, but then you start getting a bit of a handle on it. And I've since done, I think, around 1,000 gigs around the world. The interesting thing was, at the time, I was a sales controller for ITV when I did my first show. And there were certain parts of my day job that turned into a piece of cake. And that was the kind of genesis of these training workshops. I've been at ITV 11 years. I was slightly kicking my heels there, and I just got thinking about the crossover skills, transferable skills. Bumped into a buyer walking to work the other way, and we had a 2-minute chat about the price of fish. And then he said to me, look, this might be well out of left field, but I run these things called Friday inspiration meetings, where we get people in to talk about things that are kind of work related, but not really work related. And I was wondering if you would consider telling us about the transferable skills between business and comedy, when I'd already been writing it. So I took that to be some, divine intervention. And yeah, that was that. Voluntary redundancy from ITV, set up Smirk Experience. And here I am.
Amazing. What a story. And I think a very unique story compared to some of the ones that we would have heard on here. So hence why I'm interested in getting straight stuck into this. So let's start right at the top. Big, broad question. What are the transferable skills between comedy and business, and probably in particular sales?
I mean, we run workshops on branding, creativity, storytelling, resilience, and communication skills. So that would be a sort of broad, brushstroke of all of them. Communication scales are the most popular out of that list. And yeah, so that would be talking either face-to-face, online, as we're doing, to one person, to a room of 100 people. So it's how when I started in comedy, I was fascinated with the kind of psychology of controlling a crowd. It's really things like, if you finish a joke, if you finish a bit, as you finish it, put your hands together, audiences automatically clap without even knowing why they're clapping. So you end up being like the kind of puppet master, controlling people. Not that it's all kind of smoke and mirrors, and
It still has to be funny to a degree, right?
Yeah, that's it. But the funny thing about comedy is that the more you pull it apart, the more kind of serious it actually gets. I think a lot of society treats comedy as a kind of you know, a kind of weak relation of other art forms. Like, for example, we have like Sir Laurence Olivier, of course you do, but why didn't we have Sir Tommy Cooper or Sir Eric Morecambe? You know, people, it's almost like, oh, that's just been silly, that's just messing around, when actually it's bloody hard to do. And I was fascinated, you know, learning all these techniques. I got bitten by the bug after the first one and was doing like 6 shows a week. You know, I was living in London at the time. They call them open mics, so they're 5 minute. It's kind of a cross between comedy and therapy. You know, some of the people that do it shouldn't be in mainstream society, never mind on a stage with a microphone talking at people.
Are they the ones that make it or don't make it?
Well, yeah, exactly. Some of them just stay there doing that. But the trick is to film yourself having a good 5, which you then send to pro comedy promoters. Yeah. And if they like you, they book you. And then what I started doing was car shoot. A lot of the gigs are out of London, but a lot of the comics live in London. So you kind of car share to and from them. And I would be like driving TV comics, sometimes down to like Devon. And I would say like, do you mind if we talk about comedy for a bit? And they'd go, no, I don't mind. And then for the next 5 hours, I would just be like sucking their brain like they do in like films.
You know, I'm envisaging, there's a great sitcom there, isn't there, of comedians driving around the country talking about comedy. I'm surprised that isn't out there.
A guy did an Edinburgh show where he had an hour of comics telling stories in car. Sometimes the car journey was actually funnier than the gig.
I can imagine.
You almost turn up to the gig and you're a bit kind of laughed out, like, you guys should have been when we were driving through Bracknell, man. We were smashing it. And the audience are like, we don't care about that.
Yeah, you had to be there, obviously.
So you have to kind of pick up. But no, it's great. And fascinating conversations with other comics about it and stuff. I've got some bits of material because I've made a car full of comics laugh. And one of them will say, do you do that on stage? And I go, no. And they said, you should. That's really good. So you have some good collaborative chats with people. So the work that we do with companies, I basically split it up into 3 sections. It's what comics do before they're on stage, while they're on stage, and after they're on stage, to maximize their performance. And it's not just, you know, abstract stories about something that's nothing to do with anything. These are all transferable skills that we're talking about, every single part of it. And yeah, we've been doing that for the last 5 years for a bunch of companies, including Air Marketing. So I was very pleased to accept this invitation.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, we're big fans. There's two words I picked out there. One is I think I've interpreted and made up, and one is you've said it. The one that you said is about performance, and we often talk about sales, particularly prospecting, cold calls, that sort of stuff, being a performance, because you typically plan out what you were going to say, how you were going to say it, you practice it, and you'd go and deliver it time and time again and execute it. And you'd probably over time organically change it, the tone of it, based on the responses that you get. And I'm guessing that mirrors the comic process of getting to become a better stand-up comedian, where you write a script, you take it on stage, you get the feedback, you absorb it, you tweak and you change accordingly. And I can immediately see a link there. You've obviously sold and you've been in a stand-up, so you're coming from a unique position. Are there more comparables? Is that a fair comparable? And are there more that I've missed?
That is a very fair comparison. Like one of the tips, memory techniques is quite a big part of what we do, you know, being able to speak, you know, without notes makes you much more, you know, there's an awful lot more cut through. You're more authentic, you're more believable, you're more likable.
Yeah.
One of the tips that we would use is if you're planning any type of speech, it could be on the phone, it could be face to face, would be to actually have subjects as opposed to a actual word for word script, because we've all been at weddings where someone says, and now we're going to hear from the best man, and then someone stands up and goes, I first met Alan in 1997, and the whole room goes, oh, fuck.
Oh, dear.
it's going to be like pulling teeth. This is, come on, mate, come on. But if you've just got subjects, you're much more natural because you know what it is that you're talking about. And what you lose on the swings, you more than gain on the roundabout. Like if you kind of slightly fluff a word or you repeat, you know, a word or a phrase, audiences don't mind that. Audiences put that to one side because they're drawn to you. Like one of the tips in comedy is I was reading loads of books and I attended loads of comedy workshops with other comics. And one of the things that they tell you is to, in comedy, but I think it's totally true in business, is talk to an audience as if they've all got your best friend's face. Talk to your friend. It's not a question of being over familiar and calling strangers mate or love, because that doesn't work either, definitely. But if I'm talking to someone like they're a stranger, it sounds robotic, and I start making myself more nervous the more I talk like that. I didn't even like doing that. but you see what I mean? Like now how we're just kind of having a conversation like this, it's immediately you're drawn in, you know. All good presenters, even TV presenters, you know, they talk to people through the camera as if they know them. And I think if you can get the balance right in business, not being over familiar, but getting to a stage where it's, you know, it's not you're breaking down the format. People are drawn to you. So
much of business is about the connection you get with people. Just like it is in real life, but that carries across, right? We buy from the people that we connect with, and we continue to buy from, you know, every time a contract renewal comes up and we've got a supplier, we go to a supplier that we trust. And if we don't trust our current supplier, we go to market and we look for another one that we feel we can trust more than that one. And that comes down to humans. We can't trust a brand because a brand is a logo. An office is probably an office we've never seen. It's the people within that business that we either trust or we don't. And I think that relationship piece, either it is, it can be built in a number of different ways, and I can see how comedy can play a role in that to a degree. What would you say to somebody who's not naturally funny? Because I'm guessing there can come a point where that starts to be lacking in authenticity or awkward or a bit forced, perhaps, which doesn't work, I'm guessing.
My 2-word answer to that would be don't try. So part of the stuff we do on personal branding is about self-awareness. It's about knowing yourself. Lots of very famous comics have got very recognizable brands, haven't they? Like Ramesh Ranganathan is the grumpy guy, you know. You've got Milton Jones, who's the kind of kooky guy with the sweet
one-liner
hair and kind of weird one-liners, you know. So, you know, all of the McIntyre, everyone just, you know, loves him, you know. McIntyre, everyone loves McIntyre, you know, all of that sort of stuff. They've got really strong brand. Obviously, all of them are funny because they're professional comedians, but you can take the branding bit out of comedy. And I would say self-awareness, because you're right, it can get awkward. And jokes, I mean, if it works, brilliant, you know. It's really powerful, and it's a great way to bond with a room full of people if you can make them laugh. And we do some work on kind of comedy techniques if you want to, but I always say to people, look, if it's not you, then don't do it, because you end up as some kind of David Brent tribute act, which is and I've had bosses previously that I always think, you know, if you're funny, that's fine. If you're not funny, that's fine. It's the people that think they're funny when they're not funny. They're the dangerous ones.
That's what my wife says I am.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, you're obviously quite a likable fellow, aren't you, Owen? I mean, is that something that you consciously project, or are you just being natural?
I think I just am who I am. I think lovely to hear that I'm likable, and I think there's two things to that. One is I'm very conscious that my psychological makeup is that I put being liked high on my priority list. So I do think I'm conscious of it, and I've always been that way. I like to be liked. I don't like to be not liked, and I've never had that mental strength where somebody doesn't like me, it does bother me, strangely. And people say, particularly working in sales, that you need to be able to not give a shit. Well, I can't. That's not my personality at all. But I also think I'm comfortable in my own skin, and I think the ability to crack a joke here and there. I don't think about it. Sometimes I can't stop myself. Have to say I'm more conscious about it with you than I've ever been, because it's a bit like asking to do keepy ups in front of a professional footballer. I'm cracking a joke in front of a professional comic, but you get my point. But yeah, I think it's certainly not forced, and I think if it was, it would come across.
No, you're right. No, I wouldn't think it was forced. I just meant, how much you're conscious of it. I mean, quite a lot of the stuff that we do in the workshops is to do with evolutional psychology, so the idea of being liked is it's a survival trait. In fact, I got this theory about what part of the reason why a lot of people don't like public speaking is that we are conditioned to stay part of the pack, of the group. And because I think it was about 80,000 years ago when humanity left Africa to set up tribes around the world, they were around 100 people, and they weren't just kind of fun hangouts with your mates. If you were ostracized from the tribe, you would basically die. So you're hardwired to stay part of the pack. So things like being liked is all part of that. But obviously, public speaking isn't being part of the pack. Jimmy Carr's got a line where he says, out of a room of 200 people, I'm the only one facing the wrong way. And it's on. And I think you have to embrace it if you are going to do it. Part of it is we're trying to explain to people that it's their primal brain that's kind of telling them, if this goes badly, we're going to be ostracized from the group and probably die. And the two reasons why comics are such natural speakers is, one, they do it loads and loads and loads. And number two, they've all died on their arses and lived to tell the tale. There's only two types of comics, liars and liars. Anyone that says they ain't ever died hasn't been going very long, I can assure you. But you don't feel great if 150 people in Coventry think you're a wanker, but you wake up the next day and you've still got a family, you've still got somewhere to live, you've still got food. And what it means is the next time you stand up, you're not as worried as what you were before. You know the worst.
You know what it feels like,
and it's actually not that bad. And once people kind of get their heads around that, that is a real kind of shift in how they approach a lot of public speaking, I think.
You talked about resilience and an acceptance of failure as the process here is the point that's coming out in my head, and I'm going to translate it into something else. I was listening to Gareth Southgate talk to a group, and he was interviewed a little while back, and a young football player, wanting to be a professional, said, what's the one thing that the England players have in common, the top players? And he said, they've all failed. Every single one of them has been through failure, has acknowledged that failure, and consciously tried to do something about it. And nobody has ever made it without that. And it's the ones that deal with it the right way that get there. The difference isn't talent, it's not skill, it's application. And if we translate that to our audience, if you're a sales rep or sales leader, it's about trying things that are different, allowing it to fail, being okay with failure, but knowing what to do next and how to deal with that, which in a comics case is get back on the stage and do it again. In a sales rep space is, look, I made a terrible call, got hold of somebody, they were rude to me, I didn't pitch as well, as I didn't answer that objection as well, fell flat on my face, got told to bugger off, and now here I am making another call, going at it again, because I know that this one's not going to be as bad as the next. And again, I'm tying things together here and seeing all of the transferable skills and experiences that can help you. What we're not saying, go on, go.
There are loads of transferable skills, and you're absolutely right. We do a massive thing on dealing with failure, and it's possible then to talk through some of the many deaths that I've suffered, but exactly as you say, it's what you learn from it. It's that kind of. I once did a gig in Essex, and there was a great big poster for the 90s garage duo DJ Luck and MC Neat, who were appearing at a New Year's Eve party. And I made a joke about it when I got on stage, and it quickly became apparent I was the only person in the room who didn't have tickets for the party.
And you won't get them now, that's for sure.
So, and the rest of the gig went predictably badly. And after that, I would go on stage and just say, "It's my pleasure to be here in Basildon. What a lovely place," and then start, whether it was or not. So yeah, exactly right. It's people think of success and failure as two separate things, but they're not. They're inextricably linked. It's impossible to have one without the other. And the funny thing about dying on stage actually is that it's much more awkward watching someone else die on stage than it actually is being the person who's dying. I used to almost have out-of-body experiences where I'd be just up looking at myself going, "This is going terribly." But yeah, you know, there are always reasons for it, you know, and it's fascinating and it goes back to the sort of psychology of like reading a room, you know, which is a big thing that I think is vital in sales as it is in comedy, you know. Anywhere can be a gig, you know. So as obviously someone like McIntyre, he knows what, you know, all gigs are going to look like for him, but you haven't got to go very far down the rungs of the comedy ladder to find TV comics who are basically going anywhere. A vet could hire 4 comics to tell jokes while he puts people's cats and dogs down, and that would technically be a gig. And what you end up doing is turning up to a place and going, right, what's the coup here then? Where are the audience? What are the distractions around? Why might this not work, you know? And exactly was the same as true in sales. I mean, we used to have it when I was at ITV, we had some buyers who wanted to meet us in a kind of beautiful, you know, wood paneled, you know, office before. And, you know, you've got like a lovely presentation to go through, you know, on some beautiful screen. And others would want to have a business meeting after 4 pints in the Dog and Duck.
Yeah.
And, you know, you don't really want to kind of, they're obviously the buyers. And so where and how they wish to have the meeting is up to them to an extent. So, and yeah, you obviously wouldn't act like you're in the posh office if you were in the Dog and Duck, and you wouldn't act like you're in the Dog and Duck if you were in the posh office. You would kind of play it as you saw it, you know.
Yeah.
So and we do lots of work on like reading a room. The fascinating thing about a lot of it is that, you know, no one on the workshops has been brought up by wolves, you know. They are all social people who interact with other people. So what this is doing is kind of getting things that are in their subconscious to the front of their brain. So they're actually considering it, you know. That's a lot of professional performers do. I sometimes don't think that amateur performers realize the amount of preparation that goes into some professional performances. I used to work on BBC Radio, and we had bands in, and you know, like the joke about the riders, where they would get like, you know, 100 green M&Ms or a you know, a vase of red carnations, you know, and people think it's just some kind of egotistical thing for the band, you know. But I was chatting with a manager once about that, and he said they had like 3 pages of how to set their rig up for the people at the venue. And they were saying halfway through the 3 pages, it just said, put a vase of red carnations in the dressing room. And then they carried on the rest of it. And what that meant was that the band's sound engineer could turn up, get into the dressing room, and if there wasn't a vase of red carnations, he'd say, who's been setting up our sound? Because they know that it's not right. Things like that, you know, that is the level of preparation that a lot of professional performers go into. And it's the same is true in business. Like Steve Jobs is his presentation to launch the iPhone, which is now will probably it would probably look like a Nokia 3310 to us. But obviously it's important to remember that at the time that was obviously that was groundbreaking. And he didn't used to practice his speeches for hours before, days before, weeks before. He would practice them months before. He would get them so he could just say them as I'm talking to you now, as natural as that. And yeah, that is the and that's the prize that you get for the work. You know, if you put that in, it just sounds natural, and people are like, I feel like I know this guy when I don't. That's what all comics, you know, comics talk with audiences as if they're mates, whereas obviously not only are they strangers in a comedy club, you can't even see the audience. It's just so you've just got to chat totally. Nervous new comics kind of talk a bit like that, whereas experienced comics, I can remember I got onto a pro bill quite early, and I was backstage, and I hadn't been going long enough to be doing this room, and I was, you know, nervous, walking around, learning there was this pro that had been on the circuit for like 30 years, just kind of sat there, you know, I don't know, having a chat, whatever. And he said to me, "Not been going long, have you?" And I said, "No, not really. No, can you tell?" And he's like, "Yeah, a little bit."
Yeah, I can tell.
And he said to me something that completely went over my head at the time. I didn't understand it, but now I think I do. He said, "You know, the longer you go in this, the less your material matters." And at the time, I was just sort of like, "Yeah, good, thanks," and then carried on doing whatever I was doing. But he's so right. You know, there are delivery techniques to jokes. I've got 2 jokes that I've written that are too similar to do in the same night. They're similar kind of setup and punchline. Yeah, they're different, but they're quite similar. I've sometimes told half of one joke, and by error told the second half of the next joke, and it still gets a laugh because of how you do it.
Yeah.
That goes back to that sort of stuff, you know, how the different, they call it stagecraft, how you bring a performance to life. And one of them is what we spoke about earlier, is to do with picturing your best mate's face on everyone in the room. How do you talk to them then, you know?
Yeah,
It's
interesting.
no, it is. Once you start getting into lots of the psychology, the only thing is, it's a bit like opening Pandora's box, you know, like as soon as you read about body language and there's a whole thing about how people lie, you then spot when people are lying to your life. And then
it ruins everything. Yeah.
I wish I didn't know that.
Oh, she doesn't love me after all. She's been saying for 20 years. So I think let's just convert this back. So there's two things in my mind. One is, to be clear, what we're not advocating is that every sales rep out there should go and try and be a comedian, right? They're 2 very different things. But I think what we've established is that there's a lot of transferable experiences, skills, and things that one can help the other. You talking about there getting out and being natural. I mean, we talk about it in sales, right? We talk about people who, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, it's how you deliver it, it's the tone. And people can hear when you phone them, make a cold call to them, pitch to them in a boardroom for a contract. You've done this 1,000 times, or this is your first time. They can sense it and tell it depending on how you come across. And it's not the words, it's the way that you deliver them. I think what we are advocating across this, though, rather than everyone should go and be a comedian, is about embracing comedy in business. So being comfortable with bringing comedy into a room can be an accelerator for you, can be a differentiator for you, can put you ahead of others because it allows you to build a connection that you wouldn't otherwise build. Because where you talk about looking at somebody's best, face as your best friend, I think the same is also true the other way around. A comedian that does a 20-minute set or an hour set, let's say, and I go and watch them in Wembley Arena or whatever, they're my best mate at the end of the. I love them. I've never actually spoken to them. They talked at me and 1,000 other people, but I love them because of the connection it builds. And I just wonder whether that's the point here that people can take away, is that if you're comfortable being funny and having a joke or two, then embrace it in a sales and a business environment, because it might just be the thing that gets you ahead of your competitors or other people they're talking to.
I agree entirely. It's comics talk about being in the moment, you know, being in the now, you know. That's one of the best things about having an audience with someone. If you can reference something that's happening in the room or in the conversation, audiences love it. And
Mm.
the funny thing about ad libs is that they haven't actually got to be very funny. That's the kind of random thing. I did a gig once and they had this gigantic clock on the stage. It must have been like 4 foot across or something. And I went on and said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this gig for 2 reasons. One, you're a lovely audience. And number 2, I always do well in front of oversized timepieces. And that was all I said. And they all cracked up laughing because they could see, just thought of it in the moment, you know. So, and another thing that you said that's really important is that I read a thing in comedy, and it was just at the start of this, when I was a sales controller at ITV doing loads of presentations, and it said good comics talk with an audience, bad comics talk at an audience. And exactly the same is true in business. If you feel you're being spoken to too much, people just switch off. When I was doing ITV pitches, I would turn it into a conversation almost as quickly as I could, because then people are engaged. And exactly the same is true in comedy, you know. You just obviously need to make sure that you don't, like in comedy, you've got a pre-prepared set.
Yep.
In business, you've obviously got a deck of slides or something. Or a you know, if it's a phone call, you've got a pitch to go through. So you obviously need to lead it, but you need to give the impression that it could go anywhere, even though it can't, you know. Like if we're on a workshop, I might say to one thing that I love doing on the workshops is kind of deconstructing them as I do them. So I'll say to a group, yeah, do you remember half an hour ago when I asked you this? Yeah, well, that was to get you involved, wasn't it? You know, and you know, you just obviously need to make sure that you can react. Like, has anyone done this? If everyone puts up their hand to say they've already done it, then you say, oh, great. We'll get rid of the boring basic stuff and really dive into the important stuff. Someone puts up their hand, then you say, oh, perfect, a blank canvas, and away you go. So it's exactly, and it's pretty much exactly the same stuff, you know. Like the old joke about going to a Mexican restaurant and you call a waiter over and say, sorry, I didn't order this. And he comes over and goes, oh, sorry. There you go. And it's all the same stuff, just how you wrap it, you know, that's the point. So yeah, so, and I think the same, but the great thing about asking a room of people, do you do this? Whether they do or they don't, they're involved, they're invested, they then feel part of it. It's two-way, it's not a one-way thing. And that can really, as a rule in comedy, like the less people have chosen to be there, the more you have to make the first 5 minutes about them. If you go into pre-prepared stuff, they don't like it, you know, because they feel they're being spoken at.
Interesting.
The gig in Luton, it was like Shameless if it was set in Beirut or something, and like 200 people in there, and they were the sort of people that didn't mind telling you they weren't enjoying the show. Quite bluntly. I was in the toilet, really nervous, and I thought a guy said to me, "Oh, butterflies," as in, "Oh, you've got butterflies. You're nervous." And I thought, "Oh, nice bloke. He's seen that I'm worried." And I turned around to have a conversation, but he hadn't said butterflies at all. He said button flies. He told his missus to get him a pair of jeans with a zipper, but she got him one with button flies, and he couldn't do them up. And so I actually changed my whole opening and went on stage and told that story, and they all nearly fell off their chairs laughing. They loved it, just because it wasn't so. And where is he? Where is he? And he put up his hand, he had a chat with his wife, and blah blah, you know. And they loved it. And you know, that's such a small little thing. But audiences immediately feel, and then obviously once you've got them, then you go into the pre-written stuff. And it's just seamless, and they're just kind of eating out of your hand as you go through, you know. So but yeah, being able to personalize the start of what you're doing audiences just love, and it hasn't even got to be that clever. It's not, people don't need to say, yeah, well, I'm not a professional comedian, I can't write a joke or anything. You don't actually have to do that, anything that just shows that you're sharing the same bit of carpet for the next minutes. If it's pouring down with rain, make a joke about building an ark. It's the thing, and everyone goes, yeah, he's right, it's pissing down. and then off you go. You obviously got a where you want it to go. But if you start that, any little ad libs like that, audiences just love.
Really, interesting. Very interesting.
And it's exactly true in business too.
I think it is, and I think that what I've taken from this discussion today is that comedy can be a real connector in people, and we know that from comedy. But it's also something that if we can take it into sales business at the right level, there's a line where it's too much, and there's that's for sure, but at the right level, then it can be a real connector. And connecting things that help you connect and build rapport, help you get ahead of your competition, and help you move forward with the relationships that you're trying to build, particularly in sales. So I think it's a really pertinent point, and one that I don't think people are talking about. And so I think, if anything, people might have listened to this and we've gone around and got into comedy a lot, but I think that it's really relevant, because actually, if we can inject that into the relationships we build, then you are a very different sales rep to the other sales rep that they're talking to, and that can only be a real benefit and advantage. So thank you for highlighting that point. Sam, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way that they can do that?
Smirkexperience.com. Everything's on there. There's a contact session. I think the page is called Corporate Solutions. So we would be running workshops, either face-to-face or online, or comedy shows. We've started to get a few bookings now, actually, back in person, as some companies, would like to get, their staff back, or even if it's not full time. And it's obviously kind of carrots and sticks you can use, isn't it? On the one hand, say, if you don't come in, you're all fired, which probably isn't a very good idea from our point of view. But the other thing is that obviously the carrot is to say, oh, wow, this is what we're going to do. There are, in Sweden, companies put on comedy shows at breakfast times. Their company to load up on endorphins. Laughter actually creates lots of the same mental reactions that you get having been on a holiday for a couple of weeks. So, and then the idea is that they're going to go back to their desks and carry on working. Or we're still doing them online as well, as we did for you guys before Christmas.
That's right.
We must have done about 25, and I would say the air one was at the livelier end of the scale. Which
why doesn't that surprise me?
There were a couple of people that I think have been going since about 8 in the morning. But no, it's great fun. I'd always prefer a audience that you have to kind of calm down a little bit, as opposed to ones where you're looking for the defibrillators to kind of get them into life.
It was good fun, and that was our Christmas party when we were all forced into lockdown and that sort of stuff. And I think you did an amazing job of making it the best it could be in the scenario. So thank you for that, Sam, and thank you very much for today as well. I've enjoyed talking to you, hearing your anecdotes and stories from the world of comedy, but I also think we've done a good job of connecting it back into business and sales, and how embracing it can be a really good differentiator for you. So Sam, the chief Smirkistrator at Smirk Experience, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us on air, and have a great day.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Owen. Cheers, pal.
Thanks. Bye.